So we go on to chapter 11, Works and Sacrifice. Shall we begin it today? Or
yes. We can start though.
we can start it. The yoga of the intelligent will and its culmination in the Brahmic status. So the yoga of the intelligent will and its culmination in the Brahmic status, which occupies all the close of the second chapter. You'll have to tell them. Which occupies all the close of the second chapter, contains the seed of much of the teaching of the Gita. Its doctrine of desireless works, of equality, of the rejection of outward renunciation. Note here, he's even going that far to say rejection of the outward renunciation. Almost like outward renunciation is another form of ego. So rejection of outward things, rejection of outward renunciation, of devotion to the divine, which is surrender. But as yet, all this is slight and obscure. So here is your wonderful summary that you were asking for of the last chapter in these lines. So this was what Sri Aurobindo has done. Here he starts that the second chapter contains much of the seed of the teaching of the Gita. And what is the seed? And the doctrine of desireless works, of equality, of rejection of outward renunciation, of devotion to the divine. But as yet, all this is slight and obscure. What is most strongly emphasized as yet is the withdrawal of the will from the ordinary motive of human activities. The withdrawal of the will. Desire. So what is the withdrawal of the will from the ordinary motive of human activities? Desire from man's normal temperament of the sense-seeking thought and will with its passions and ignorance, and from its customary habit of troubled, many branching ideas and wishes to the desireless calm unity and the passionless serenity of the Brahmic poise. So this is what is most strongly emphasized. Withdrawal of the will, right? From desire, from man's normal temperament of the sense-seeking thought and will, its passions, ignorance, its customary habit of troubled ideas and wishes to the desireless calm unity and passionless serenity of the Brahmic poise. So much Arjun has understood. He is not unfamiliar with all this. It is the substance of the current teaching, which points man to the path of knowledge and to the renunciation of life and works as his way of perfection. The intelligence withdrawing from sense and desire and human action and turning to the highest, to the one, to the actionless Purusha, to the immobile, to the featureless Brahman, that surely is the eternal seed of knowledge. There is no room here for works. Now, it's interesting, he's starting this. This is the very much the Sankhya Yoga. In Sankhya Yoga, if you do pure Sankhya Yoga and the yoga of the intelligent will, there is no room there for works. So he is now going into that. So don't get confused with what we just read. The intelligence withdrawing from sense and desire and human action and turning to the highest, to the one, to the actionless Purusha, to the immobile, to the featureless Brahman, that surely is the eternal seed of knowledge. There is no room here for works, since works belong to the ignorance. Action is the very opposite of knowledge. Its seed is desire, and its fruit is bondage. So in the Sankhya Yoga, there is no room for works because action is the very opposite of knowledge, because the seed of action is desire, its seed is desire, and its fruit is bondage. That is the orthodox philosophical doctrine. And Krishna seems quite to admit it when he says that works are far inferior to the yoga of the intelligence. And yet, works are insisted upon as part of the yoga, so that there seems to be in this teaching a radical inconsistency. Not only so, for some kind of work, no doubt may persist for a while, the minimum, the most inoffensive, but here is a work wholly inconsistent with knowledge, with serenity, and with the motionless peace of the self-delighted soul, a work terrible, even monstrous, a bloody strife, a ruthless battle, a giant massacre. Yet it is this that is enjoined, this that is sought to justify by the teaching of inner peace and desireless equality and status in the Brahman. Here, then, is an unreconciled contradiction. Arjuna complains that he has been given a contradictory and confusing doctrine, not the clear, strenuously single road by which the human intelligence can move straight and trenchantly to the supreme good. It is an answer to this objection that the Gita begins at once to develop more clearly its positive and imperative doctrine of works. The teacher first makes a distinction between the two means of salvation on which in this world men can concentrate separately. So first the teacher makes a distinction between the two means of salvation. What are they? The yoga of knowledge and the yoga of works. The one implying, it is usually supposed, renunciation of works as an obstacle to salvation. The other, which is the yoga of works, accepting works as a means of salvation. He does not yet insist strongly on any fusion of them or any reconciliation of the thought that divides them, but begins by showing that the renunciation of the Sankhyas, the physical renunciation, sannyasa, is neither the only way nor at all the better way. Neshkarmya, a calm, neshkarmya, a calm voidness from works, is no doubt that to which the soul, the Purusha, has to attain. For it is Prakriti which does the work, and the soul has to rise above involution in the activities of the being and attain to a free serenity and poise, watching over the operations of Prakriti, but not affected by them. So this is very important. While he does not as yet bring about a fusion between the two, yet he quite clearly distinguishes and suggests that the method of practice be what he calls neshkarmya, which is a calm voidness from works. The Purusha has to attain this, for it is Prakriti that does the work, and the Purusha has to rise above in the activities of the being and attain to a free serenity and poise, watching over the operations of Prakriti, but not affected by them. That and not cessation of the works of Prakriti is what is really meant by the soul's neshkarmya. Therefore, it is an error to think that by not engaging in any kind of action, this actionless state of the soul can be attained and enjoyed. So by not doing works, by not doing any action, it is an error to think that by not acting, from abstaining from action, one can attain the state of detachment and yoga. So, therefore, it is an error to think that by not engaging in any kind of action, this actionless state of the soul can be attained and enjoyed. Mere renunciation of works is not a sufficient, not even quite a proper means for salvation. Not by abstention from works does a man enjoy actionlessness. Not by abstention from works does a man enjoy actionlessness, nor by mere renunciation of works does he attain to his perfection, to siddhi, the accomplishment of the aims of his self-discipline by yoga. But at least it must be one necessary means, indispensable, imperative, but at least it must be. So again, this question he poses. But however, isn't it one necessary means, indispensable to at least to give up works or to abstain from it or to, renounce it? Is it one way? He asks this question. But at least it must be one necessary means, indispensable, imperative. For how, if the works of Prakriti continue, can the soul help being involved in them? How can I fight and yet in my soul not think or feel that I, the individual, am fighting, not desire victory, nor be inwardly touched by defeat? So Arjun asks this of Sri Krishna. How can I fight and yet in my soul not think or feel that I, the individual, am fighting, not desire victory, nor be inwardly touched by defeat? This is the teaching of the Sankhyas, that the intelligence of the man who engages in the activities of nature is entangled in egoism, ignorance, and desire, and therefore drawn to action. On the contrary, if the intelligence draws back, then the action must cease with the cessation of the desire and the ignorance. Therefore, the giving up of life and works is a necessary part, an inevitable circumstance, and an indispensable last means of the movement to liberation. Thus, this objection of a current logic, it is not expressed by Arjuna, but it is in his mind, as the turn of his subsequent utterances shows. So this objection of a current logic that Sri Krishna is giving, that you do works, but do it in this way. So this is contrary to what, we have been, which is very difficult. How do you do that? And this logic seems to be flawed. And how do I begin to navigate this? So it is in his mind, and Arjuna then continues to ask. The teacher immediately anticipates this, that this is what is in Arjuna's mind. It is not expressed by Arjuna, but it is in his mind, as the turn of his subsequent utterances show. The teacher immediately anticipates. No, he says, such renunciation, far from being indispensable, is not even possible. Now, here he says, such renunciation of works, of all action, is besides, far from being indispensable, is not even possible. For none stands even for a moment not doing work. Everyone is made to do action helplessly by the modes born of Prakriti. So once again, we come to the same thing, that as long as we are in the external world, action and works is something that happen. Whether you cannot for one moment stand and say that I'm not doing any work. Prakriti is constantly at work. For none stands even for a moment not doing work. Everyone is made to do action helplessly by the modes born of Prakriti. The strong perception of the great cosmic action and the eternal activity and power of the cosmic energy, which was so much emphasized afterwards by the teaching of the Tantric Shaktas, who even made Prakriti or Shakti superior to Purusha, is a very remarkable feature of the Gita. So, the strong perception of the great cosmic action and the eternal activity and power of the cosmic energy, which was so much emphasized afterwards by the teaching of the Tantric Shaktas, who even made Prakriti or Shakti, as we know it, superior to Purusha, is a very remarkable feature of the Gita. Although here an undertone, it is still strong enough, coupled with what we might call the theistic and devotional elements of its thought, to bring in that activism which so strongly modifies in its scheme of yoga the quietistic tendencies of the old metaphysical Vedanta. So, to bring in that activism which so strongly modifies in its scheme of yoga the quietistic tendencies of the old metaphysical Vedanta, man embodied in the natural world cannot cease from action. So, man embodied in the natural world cannot cease from action, not for a moment, not for a second. His very existence here is an action. The whole universe is an act of God. Mere living, even, is his movement. So the mere act of living, even, is his movement. So this whole universe is an act of God. Our physical life, its maintenance, its continuance, is a journey, a pilgrimage of the body, Sharira Yatra, and that cannot be effected without action. But even if a man could leave his body unmaintained, otiose, if he could stand still always like a tree or sit inert like a stone, tishtati, that vegetable or material immobility would not save him from the hands of nature. He would not be liberated from her workings. For it is not our physical movements and activities alone which are meant by works, by karma. Our mental existence also is a great complex action. It is even the greater and more important part of the works of the unresting energy, subjective cause and determinant of the physical. We have gained nothing if we repress the effect, but retain the activity of the subjective cause. So the objects of sense are only an occasion for our bondage. The mind's insistence on them is the means, and so on. So shall I continue till the end of this paragraph? Yeah, I think I should. Then we'll start from there again. So here, I think what, Sri Aurobindo is explaining in the teachings of Sri Krishna is that basically he's saying there is nothing like inaction. There is nothing like escape from works or escape from action. The whole universe is an act of God. And everything, whether our living is an act is his action. So therefore, and we cannot just run away from it. And the objects of sense are only an occasion for our bondage. The mind, and the greater action is not in the physical sphere. It is in the mental sphere, the mind itself. The action of the mind is something, even if you were to sit still like a tree or a stone or become jada, become totally inert, even then he says you cannot escape because the mind is still in movement. So a man may control his organs of action and refuse to give them their natural play. But he has gained nothing if his mind continues to remember and dwell upon the objects of sense. So the objects of sense are only an occasion. The mind's insistence on them is the means, the instrumental cause. And therefore, a man may control his organs of action and refuse to give them their natural play, but he has gained nothing if his mind continues to remember and dwell upon the objects of sense. Such a man has bewildered himself with false notions of self-discipline. He has not understood its object or its truth, nor the first principles of his subjective existence. Therefore, all his methods of self-discipline are false and null. There's a note. I cannot think that mithyachara means a hypocrite. How is a man a hypocrite who inflicts on himself so severe and complete a privation? He is mistaken and deluded. What is the word here? Vimudhetma, and his akara, his formally regulated method of self-discipline is a false and vain method. This surely is all that the Gita means. So this is what he's saying, that it's not that he's a man who, don't call somebody who's doing this a hypocrite, because even that is very, very difficult. It is a delusion that he might think that through the physical abstinence, through the physical immobility of the body, through the physical giving up of all works, and through the indrawn senses alone, he can stop working and therefore reach liberation, which is not possible. So then he says that the body's actions, even the mind's actions, are nothing in themselves, neither a bondage nor the first cause of bondage. So the body's actions and the mind's actions are nothing in themselves, neither a bondage nor the first cause of bondage. What is vital is the mighty energy of nature, which will have her play, and her play in her great field of mind and life and body. What is dangerous in her is the power of her three gunas, modes or qualities, to confuse and bewilder the intelligence and so obscure the soul. So it is not the body's actions or even the mind's action that are the cause of bondage. What is vital is the mighty energy of Prakriti, of nature, which will have her play and her play in her great field of mind and life and body. What is dangerous in her is the power of her three gunas, modes or qualities, to confuse and bewilder the intelligence and so obscure the soul. That, as we shall see later, is the whole crux of action and liberation for the Gita. Be free from obscuration and bewilderment by the three gunas, and action can continue, as it must continue. And even the largest, richest, or most enormous and violent action, it does not matter, for nothing then touches the Purusha. The soul has Nesh Dharma. So we end here. Anuradha, you want to say anything on this?
Hello. Yes, Amitadi, I was listening to it, and this part where he's saying that there is a difference between someone who's a hypocrite in that mithyachara, which means that they're consciously, knowingly, they are consciously doing something else. But he says that here it is more of the vimudhatma, as in one who is so delusioned that he cannot even see that which is right. And this feature of delusionment comes from the tamasic vibrationary quality of the individual, and which is the result of the guna's action within the human consciousness. So when he ends here, that the crux is really about understanding, where he says the whole crux is of action as the and liberation for the Gita. So when we come to the gunas, the ideas of the gunas is that all these three qualities exist. So when we are working through the lens of the different vibratory patterns, where sattva is in alignment, it is completely it creates a certain transparency in the being between what is coming from external and how the person from outside and how the person is acting on that basis. So that is the sattvic state of being, where there is a transparency. So you see things as such, there is no distortion that is happening, and therefore the actions are informed and enlightened, which is what is the moksha of the Gita. In contrast to that, you have the worst case, which is the
But
tamasic.
Anuradha, I'm going to stop you there. He says to get the three gunas of the, he's asking for a liberation from the attachment or from the three gunas. So sattva is also a guna.
Thank you,
Is it?
Amita. I had
Yes,
the
that's what
same doubt. I had the same doubt. It had to be all the three gunas, not only on the tamas, because every person predominantly could have different gunas, right? It can't be only it can't be only tamas.
So the point is this, that there are three qualities. The gunas are the three qualities, and because they are part of the movement of nature, part of the movement of prakriti, there can be some intrinsic problems in them, which is what we can inherit or we can acquire them. The ideal is, of course, to go beyond it, where you are in the purusha state,
Yeah,
which
but
means that
then tamas doesn't need to be the predominant for this to happen. It could be rajas
so
also, it could be
yes,
sattva also.
if I can just again draw this out for you, I can try and present it in the way I do generally, to just bring some clarity in what I mean by the disturbances and all. So, for example, if I can just quickly show you this here. Just give me a second. Yeah. So, for example, I was telling you that if the human system is like this, where there are inputs through the senses, let's say that's the eye. Sorry, it's very distorted. If that's the eye, okay, that's the input. Then you can have three qualities of being. So one quality is where the physical consciousness, let's say it's a more dense kind of a consciousness, is aligned with the emotional, or the pranic is in alignment with the mental, and you have the upper, the vijnana. This is the panchakosha part, and you have the ananda that is there. Okay, they're the five layers of the being, or the physical, the emotional, or the vital, and the mental. This can be one model. Another model is the rajasic, where it is dynamic. I mean, there is action that is happening. And because that action is happening, whatever is coming in is undergoing a certain distortion. And therefore, the output is usually the egocentric output, because of the notion of I am the doer. And then you have the third one, which is the real tamasic one. This is coming to various factors. So what they're saying is that when we are in the Sankhya mode of action with the three gunas, if this is the tamasic, then the sattvic is the desirable. But the ideal is when there is a direct connection of the purusha with the action, where the psychic being, without going through the medium of the mind, the body, vital, and mind, can directly act. While using these three as its instruments, it is not colored and disfigured, or it's not colored or distorted by the medium through which it is expressing itself in action. Does this make sense? So therefore, it is desirable to be, like I said, the psychic has to act directly. And of these three, the sattva is the most undisturbed, because it is in alignment with its higher qualities. And therefore, it is, but still there is an element of the spiritual, of the personal here in this
At
this
this
case.
moment, Sri Aurobindo has not introduced the psychic for the
So,
elevation beyond the
yes.
gunas.
So if I may just like try and make a comparison of the three transformations that Sri Aurobindo talks about, where first he says it's the psychic transformation. In my understanding, that psychic transformation would happen when the sattva is predominant, because there is no distortion, there is a direct action. The second is the spiritual transformation. The spiritual transformation is a direct action from above on everything that is happening through the human life. In that context, there is a trigunatita. You're going beyond all the gunas. In the psychic transformation, the being of the individual is still guided by the inner forces, by the inner voice of the individual. In the spiritual, that individual has been sort of removed. It is the spiritual that is directly acting through the individual. And then you have the final transformation of the being, the integral transformation, or the final transformation that he talks about. So in the Trigunatita, what Krishna and all are, they're beyond because they're in direct connect with the cosmos as such. It is not mediating through the instrumentation of the human being. The mediation of through the instrumentation of the human being is colored by the movements of their nature. And these colorings can be like, it's also there in terms of color, the black and the white, of course, with that. And there is a red, if I remember, for the Rajas. So when it is free of any coloring, then there is a direct action from the top. This is how I understand this.
Okay, so basically, yeah, that you were explaining that sort of note below, right?
Yes, yes. The hypocrite one, where he's saying that mithyachara is not a conscious hypocrisy, but it is a delusioned action which might appear to be what do you say, hypocrite actions, because what they're thinking is not what they're saying.
Yeah.
But that is happening because of the ignorance through which they're
Yeah.
operating.
You're saying that is the element of a higher element of tamas. That's what you were trying to
Yes,
say.
yes. So once there is awareness, so the reason why this disconnect is there, because one doesn't know what one is thinking and what one is saying. There is often a big gap in between, which can be or which is caused by the let's say various other factors that we take into calculation, and we don't necessarily retain the transparency in action. So the more conscious we are, the more liberated we will get from these movements of the being, the more actions will happen because they have to happen in that manner. So in the Vedic thought, it would be that you act in Rita. You do that which is right. And that's the whole call of Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna is telling Arjuna in the war that you have to act because that is the act to be performed. Not because you think you're a great warrior, not because you think that they are your families and therefore you family members and therefore you can't do anything. You have to act because dharma is at stake, and your action will remove adharma and establish dharma. So action for the sake of right action. That is what is liberation in action, free of any other consideration.
Good. So I think we can end here today. The last word, two, three lines. That, as we shall see later, is the whole crux of action and liberation for the Gita, which is be free from obscuration and bewilderment by the three gunas, and action can continue, as it must continue, and even the largest, richest, or most enormous and violent action. It does not matter, for nothing then touches the Purusha. The soul has Naish Karmya. So we end. Yeah, how do you pronounce that?
Naish karmya.
Naish Karmya. Okay. Right, so shall we end here with the meditation? I think and start from we stopped. I'm going to start from the last paragraph, which because it has a our physical life. Yeah. Our physical life, its maintenance, page 107, works and sacrifice. It says in the Gita. Okay, page 100 for the older books. Our physical life, its maintenance, its continuance is a journey, a pilgrimage of the body, Sharira Yatra, and that cannot be effected without action. But even if a man could leave his body unmaintained, odious, if he could stand still, always like a tree, or sit inert like a stone, tishtati, that vegetable or material immobility would not save him from the hands of nature. he would not be liberated from her workings. For it is not our physical movements and activities alone which are meant by works, by karma. So we normally correlate karma to action, to work. But here, very clearly, Sri Aurobindo is saying and bringing out this important fact that even if the body were to turn into a tree, become as immobile as a tree or a stone, still one would not be liberated from the workings of the three gunas, from Prakriti, from nature. For it is not our physical movements and activities alone which are meant by works, by karma. Our mental existence also is a great complex action. It is even the greater and more important part of the works of the unresting energy. So our mental existence is a very great complex action and is even the greater and more important part of the works of the unresting energy of Prakriti, works of Prakriti. Subjective cause and determinant of the physical. So the subjective cause and determinant of the physical is the mind. And karma is far more applicable and far more potently present in the mind and in the mental energy, in the mental existence as it is in the physical. And this is very important because we normally only look at the outer, our physical actions as work and karma. We never look at our mental thoughts, our mental action, the mental movements that constitute our consciousness as work and as action and as karma. Because it is the mind first that thinks and decides, and then the body follows. And it is this mental action of the mind, the mental existence, that is far more, as he says, far greater and more important part of the works of the unresting energy. And this is the subjective cause and determinant of the physical. We have gained nothing if we repress the effect but retain the activity of the subjective cause. So repression, suppression of the physical does not, we have gained nothing by suppression and repression of the outer physical movements if we retain the activity of the subjective cause, that is our mental, our thoughts, our dwelling on, our emotions, which is also a part of the mind. So um, the whole manas, what they call is, that is what is more important. And therefore, the Gita constantly goes back to this idea of establishing peace in the mind, calm in the mind, equality, equanimity, samatha. The objects of sense are only an occasion for our bondage. So all these sense objects that we see around us, whatever we get attracted to, what are the objects of sense? Can you give me some examples? Yes, so the objects of sense are only an occasion for our bondage. The mind's insistence on them is the means. So the objects of sense, all that our sensory organs perceive and see or hear or taste or experience, or whether it's auditory, whether it's physical, sensory, those are only the occasion for our bondage. They are not the mind's insistence dwelling on. The mind's insistence on them is the means, the instrumental cause of the action, of the bondage. The cause is not the objects of sense, but the interest, insistence, of the mind that dwells on them, that causes. A man may control his organs of action and refuse to give them their natural play, but he has gained nothing if his mind continues to remember and dwell upon the objects of sense. So, this is what causes attachment. The dwelling on remembrance of the objects of sense, that which has attracted him. So, it's the dwelling on, a very simple example is what? Food, yes? You craving for food, so you might abstain from eating, but that craving for it, its dwelling, that remembrance of it, the dwelling on it is what causes the bondage, yes. And that is where you lose your samatha and your equanimity, and that is when you get carried away by the senses, by prakriti. Now, this is a simple example, but these are various examples that, when you don't get what you want, or you fall into depression, or anger, or, all these things that happen, how do they take place? What is the point at which you become like that? This is the way that it happens. A man may control his organs of action and refuse to give them their natural play. But he has gained nothing if his mind continues to remember and dwell upon the objects of sense. Such a man has bewildered himself with false notions of self-discipline. So we think self-discipline is when we do not act. But these are false notions of self-discipline.
When if someone says something you don't react to that, but you constantly
Yeah, exactly. So if someone is saying something nasty to you, you don't react. But that dwelling on that thought and what he said and what happened and this and that and the emotional response that happens within you is far more potent. And that is what creates the bewilderment. Such a man has bewildered himself with false notions of self-discipline. He has not understood its object or its truths, nor the first principles of his subjective existence. Therefore, all his methods of self-discipline are false and null. Very strong words from Sri Aurobindo here. All his, very strong. He has not understood the object or its truth, nor the first principles of his subjective existence. He's not understood his own existence, his own way that we live, the whole subjective existence. Therefore, all his methods of self-discipline are false and null. Yeah. So we read that last time. The body's actions, even the mind's actions, are nothing in themselves. Okay? Now he's going to one step further. Is the body's actions, even the mind's actions themselves, are nothing in themselves, neither a bondage nor the first cause of bondage. What is vital is the mighty energy of nature, of Prakriti, which will have her way and her play in her great field of mind and life and body. What is dangerous in her is the power of her three gunas, modes or qualities, to confuse and bewilder the intelligence and so obscure the soul. So this confusion and bewilderment of the intelligence obscures the soul. So then he goes on and says, not only the body's action, even the mind's actions are nothing in themselves. What is vital is the mighty energy, the three gunas of nature, which will have her way and her play in her great field of mind and life and body. What is dangerous in her is the power of her three gunas modes or qualities to confuse and bewilder the intelligence and so obscure the soul. So even if the mind were to, the mind's action, if it were the mind were detached, equanimous, and still, the mind's action also would not cause this bondage. It is when the mind gets attached and becomes and Prakriti, the three gunas attach themselves to the mind. The vital, the mental, three gunas are sattva, tamas, and rajas. So when it becomes attached, then the problem starts. So the body's actions then modes would confuse and bewilder the intelligence and so obscure the soul. That, as we shall see later, is the whole crux of action and liberation for the Gita. Be free from obscuration and bewilderment. So the whole crux is this, to be free from obscuration and bewilderment by the three gunas, and action can continue. So if you're free from bewilderment of and obscuration of the three gunas, then you can act. Action can continue, as it must continue. And even the largest, richest, or most enormous and violent action can continue. It does not matter, for nothing then touches the Purusha. The soul has Nesh Garmaya. Okay? But at present, now this is where we ended last time. We'll start now. But at present, the Gita does not proceed to that larger point. Since the mind is the instrumental cause, since inaction is impossible, what is rational, necessary, the right way, is a controlled action of the subjective and objective organism. The mind must bring the senses under its control. So, since action is impossible and the mind is the instrumental cause, he hints at this thing, but he says now at present the Gita has not gone to that point, comes back to the mind again. Since the mind is the instrumental cause, since inaction is impossible, what is rational, necessary, the right way, is a controlled action of the subjective and objective organism. So controlled action, not only outer action, but inner action, or subjective. The mind must bring the senses under its control as an instrument of the intelligent will, and then the organs of action must be used for their proper office, for action. But for action done as yoga. But what is the essence of this self-control? What is meant by action done as yoga, karma yoga? So this is a very, very important question. The mind must bring the senses under its control as an instrument of the intelligent will. And then the organs of action must be used for their proper office for action. But for action done as yoga. But what is the essence of this self-control? What is meant by action done as yoga, karma yoga? It is non-attachment. It is to do works without clinging with the mind to the objects of sense and the fruit of the works. Not complete inaction, which is an error, a confusion, a self-delusion, an impossibility, but action full, free, done without subjection to sense and passion, desireless and unattached works are the first secret of perfection. Is that clear? So this is what karma yoga is. It is non-attachment, firstly. Secondly, it is to do works without clinging with the mind to the objects of sense and the fruit of the works, the results of the work. And certainly it does not mean not to act, but it means to, but action full and free done without subjection to sense and passion, desireless and unattached works are the first secret of perfection. Do action thus self-controlled, says Krishna. Niyatam kuru karma kvam. I have said that knowledge, the intelligence, is greater than works. Jyayasi karmano buddhi. But I did not mean that inaction is greater than action. So while knowledge is greater than works, I did not say that inaction is greater than action. This is what Sri Krishna tells Arjuna. The contrary is the truth. Karma jyayaso akarmana. For knowledge does not mean renunciation of works. So karma jyayaso akarmana. For knowledge does not mean renunciation of works. It means equality and non-attachment to a desire and the objects of sense. And it means the poise of the intelligent will in the soul, free and high uplifted above lower instrumentation of Prakriti. So what does knowledge does not mean renunciation of works. It means equality and non-attachment to desire. So what is knowledge in when he says knowledge is greater than works, what does he mean? He says that knowledge, but knowledge does not mean renunciation of works. It means equality, non-attachment to desire and objects of sense. It means the poise of the intelligent will in the soul, free and high, uplifted above the lower instrumentation of Prakriti, and controlling the works of the mind and the senses and the body in the power of self-knowledge and the pure objectless self-delight of spiritual realization. Niyatam karma. There is a note here. Again, I cannot accept the current interpretation of Niyatam karma. This is, I think, Sri Aurobindo writing that there was a current interpretation of Niyatam karma which he does not accept, as if it meant fixed and formal works and were equivalent to the Vedic Nitya karma, the regular works of sacrifice. So, Niyatam karma does not mean the regular works of sacrifice only, ceremonial and the daily rule of Vedic living. Surely Niyata simply takes up the Niyamya of the last verse. Krishna makes a statement. He who controlling the senses by the mind engages with the organs of action in yoga of action, he excels. There's a direct translation of the verse. He who controlling the senses by the mind engages with the organs of action in yoga of action, he excels. Manasa niyamya arabte karma yogam, and he immediately goes on to draw from the statement an injunction to sum it up and convert it into a rule. Do thou do controlled action. Niyatam kuru karma tvam. Niyatam takes up the niyamya. Kuru karma takes up the arabhyate karma yogam. Not formal works fixed by an external rule, but desireless works controlled by the liberated buddhi is the Gita's teaching. This is very important. Not formal works, which is making sacrifices, doing the Vedic rituals, because a lot of people have, have interpreted the Gita's work as Vedic rituals and Vedic sacrifices. Not formal works fixed by an external rule, but desireless works, controlled by the liberated buddhi, the intelligent will, is the Gita's teaching. So this note is here specifically uh, to explain what niyatam karma means in the sense that he feels that Shri Krishna is using it and not in the way that it is normally or has been interpreted in the past. So buddhi yoga is fulfilled by karma yoga. The yoga of the self-liberating intelligent will finds its full meaning by the yoga of desireless works. Thus the Gita founds its teaching of the necessity of desireless works, nishkama karma, and unites the subjective practice of the Sankhyas, rejecting their merely physical rule, with the practice of yoga. So, in summation, what the Gita does is that it teaches the necessity of desireless works, nishkama karma, unites the subjective practice of the Sankhyas. You know what the Sankhya practice is? What? Hmm? What is the Sankhya practice? The Prakriti and the Purusha, the many Purushas and the one Prakriti. So that was the way to, yeah. So the subjective practice of the Sankhya, rejecting their merely physical rule with the practice of yoga. So the Sankhya's basically what they brought in was the idea of living in the uh, of going beyond that of the Prakriti, of the intelligent will. The yoga of the intelligent will is a very concept that has come from the Sankhya's. Okay. But still there is an essential difficulty unsolved. Desire is the ordinary motive of all human actions. So what is the essential difficulty unsolved? Essential desire. How do you deal with desire? Desire is the ordinary motive of all human actions. So most of us act either because of desire or, through desire. It is the goad for action. Desire is the ordinary motive of all human actions. And if the soul is free from desire, then there is no further rationale for action. We may be compelled to do certain works for the maintenance of the body, but even that is a subjection to the desire of the body, which we ought to get rid of if we are to attain perfection. But granting that this cannot be done, the only way is to fix a rule for action outside ourselves, not dictated by anything in our subjectivity, the nitya karma of the Vedic rule, the routine of ceremonial sacrifice, daily conduct, and social duty, which the man who seeks liberation may do simply because it is enjoined upon him, without any personal purpose or subjective interest in them, with an absolute indifference to the doing, not because he is compelled by his nature, but because it is enjoined by the Shastra. But if the principle of the action is not to be external to the nature, but subjective, but if the principle of the action is not to be external to the nature, but subjective, if the actions even of the liberated and the sage are to be controlled and determined by his nature, swabhava niyatam, then the only subjective principle of action is desire of whatever kind, lust of the flesh, or emotion of the heart, or base or noble aim of the mind, but all subject to the gunas of Prakriti. Let us then interpret the niyata karma of the Gita as the nitya karma of the Vedic rule. It's kartavya karma or work that has to be done as the Aryan rule of social duty, and let us take too its work done as a sacrifice to mean simply these Vedic sacrifices and this fixed social duty performed disinterestedly and without any personal object. This is how the Gita's doctrine of desireless work is often interpreted. So, most often, in almost, in a lot of the interpretations of the Gita that we read, Kartavya karma is interpreted as social duty, perform disinterested duty, duty to one's family, duty to one's country, duty to one's dharma, So all this social duty, most of our, we read almost 80% of the interpretations of the Gita, Kartavya karma is interpreted like this. So, but however, that is not the interpretation. That is what that Sri Krishna used at that time, and that Sri Aurobindo is pointing out here. So, right. So, let us then interpret the Niyata karma of the Gita as the Nitya karma of the Vedic rule. It's Kartavya karma, or work that has to be done as the Aryan rule of social duty. And let us take too its work done as a sacrifice to mean simply these Vedic sacrifices and this fixed social duty performed disinterestedly and without any personal object. This is how the Gita's doctrine of desireless work is often interpreted. But it seems to me, now this is of course a very personal statement Sri Aurobindo is making, but it seems to me that the Gita's teaching is not so crude and simple, not so local and temporal and narrow as all that. It is large, free, subtle, and profound. It is for all time and for all men, not for a particular age and country. Especially, it is always breaking free from external forms, details, dogmatic notions, and going back to principles and the great facts of our nature and our being. It is a work of large philosophic truths and spiritual practicality, not of constrained religious and philosophical formulas and stereotyped dogmas. So, do your duty. For most of us grow up with this in our families too. Now, the boys and the sons take on the family business, and they're told that this is your duty, and this is what you have to do, and this is what the Gita enjoins, and all of our interpretations, very practically in our life, we are constantly interpreting kartavya karma as social duty or family duty or duty in some form or the other, moral duty. Yes. However, here Sri Aurobindo says that, or as far as the Vedic time is concerned, Vedic sacrifices, Vedic rituals, the performing of various yagnas and so on. But he says that doesn't seem to be, this is too narrow. It seems that the Gita is not just written for a particular age or a particular religion or a particular kind. It is a work of large philosophical truth and spiritual practicality. The difficulty is this: how our nature being what it is, and desire the common principle of its action, is it possible to institute a really desireless action? So the difficulty is this. What is the difficulty? How our nature being what it is, which is governed by the three gunas and swayed by them in some proportion or the other through the objects of sense, how that nature, how our nature being what it is and desire the common principle of its action, is it possible to institute a really desireless action? For what we call ordinarily disinterested action is not really desireless. It is simply a replacement of certain smaller personal interests by other larger desires, which have only the appearance of being impersonal: virtue, country, mankind. So these have an appearance of being impersonal, but they are the replacement of our smaller desires of self-interest, aggrandizement, for wealth, for position, for name, for fame, for ambition, whatever it might, to a larger impersonal desire, but desire all the same. So, for what we call ordinarily disinterested action is not really desireless. It is simply a replacement of certain smaller personal interests by other larger desires which have only the appearance of being impersonal, like virtue, country, mankind. All action, moreover, as Krishna insists, is done by the gunas of Prakriti, by our nature. In acting according to the Shastra, we are still acting according to our nature, even if this Shastric action is not, as it usually is, a mere cover for our desires. Prejudices, passions, egoisms, our personal, national, sectarian vanities, sentiments, and preferences. That even otherwise, even at the purest, still we obey a choice of our nature. And if our nature were different, and the gunas acted on our intelligence and will in some other combination, we would not accept the Shastra, but live according to our pleasure or our intellectual notions, or else break free from the social law to live the life of the solitary or the ascetic. We cannot become impersonal by obeying something outside ourselves, any Shastra for that matter, any rule. We cannot become impersonal by obeying something outside ourselves, whether that be duty to the nation, virtue, duty to the country, duty to something else, whatever it might be. We cannot become impersonal by obeying something outside ourselves, for we cannot so get outside ourselves. We can only do it by rising to the highest in ourselves, into our free soul and self, which is the same and one in all, and has therefore no personal interests, to the divine in our being, who possesses himself transcendent of cosmos, and is therefore not bound by his cosmic works or his individual action. So that is the only way we can uh, uh, go to our live at a level of beyond desire when we start obeying the highest in ourselves, and we become conscious and in possession of our soul and live according to the dictates of our soul and the highest self, the free soul and self, which is the same and one in all. So that which is what you call as the uh, uh, cosmic Purusha or the transcendent Purusha, whatever. Hmm? So when one lives in that and is has moved away and upwards from the prakritic nature of one's outer nature to the higher self and lives in that higher self, the Jivatman, then only can one be free from desire and from the effects and the control of the gunas. Now, so listen to this again. We cannot become impersonal by obeying something outside ourselves, whatever Shastra it may be, whatever rule or duty it might be. For we cannot so get outside ourselves. We can only do it by rising to the highest in ourselves, into our free soul and self, with a capital S, which is the same and one in all, and has therefore no personal interests. To the divine in our being who possesses himself transcendent of cosmos, the transcendent divine, and is therefore not bound by his cosmic works or his individual action. That is what the Gita teaches, and desirelessness is only a means to this end. So desirelessness is a means, not the end, not an aim in itself. Yes, but how is it to be brought about? By doing. So, yes, we understand that desirelessness is only a means to this end, not the end itself, not the aim itself. The idea is to rise above to our highest self, to the divine Purusha, to the transcendent self, whatever you want to call it, the Jivatman, which is the most precise word, uh, and, 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 and to rise above the three gunas. But how? That is what the Gita teaches, and desirelessness is only a means to that end, not the aim in itself. Yes, but how is it to be brought about? By what? By doing all works. Now, this is the answer. How do we begin to do that? By doing all works with sacrifice as the only object, is the reply of the divine teacher. By doing works otherwise than for sacrifice, this world of men is in bondage to works. The sacrifice practice works, O son of Kunti, becoming free from all attachment. So this idea of offering, and I'm going to explain this to you in a simple way because the mother has done it so simply. How do you practice this in your day-to-day life? This idea of becoming, of doing, of rising above one's gunas and acting from a higher consciousness by remembering and offering. This one sentence, remember who? Remember the divine. And offer what? Offer all your works, all your actions. Start making an offering of everything. So when anything happens, call the divine. Go upward rather than go for outwards or stay on this level. Go upwards. First offer it. Then act or think or decide. So even in the mind, that act has to happen, not just the physical action. So a simple thing the mother said for practice, because in the end, what are we reading the Gita for? We are reading for it for giving us some clues, some knowledge, some wisdom on how to lead our daily life and to act and how to become karma yogis, right? So what the mother said is that in the morning when you wake up, the first thing you do is to offer your day, to remember the divine and to offer your day and make this a practice. Ask the divine to guide you. Ask the divine to be present in everything you do, knowingly or unknowingly. You may forget. At every moment, you may not remember. But if you start with that offering and then keep doing that through the day as and when you get the opportunity to. So start in the morning, do it in the afternoon, do it at night. And then when you start this practice, something starts happening automatically. Your being, instead of being subjected to the vital nature or to your emotional and mental thoughts and vibrations, immediately rises to a higher level. And the higher consciousness begins to descend into your mind and body. So then what happens is this becomes you have opened the doors for the entry of the higher consciousness into your mind, into your emotional being, and into your physical being as it keeps going deeper and deeper. So this remember and offer, though it seems rather simple, is a very, very, very important practice. So by doing all works with sacrifice is the only object. So sacrifice here is meant making sacred, offering. Yes, not the Vedic sacrifices. That is what the Gita teaches, and desirelessness is only a means to this end, not the aim in itself. But how is it to be brought about? By doing all works with sacrifice as the only object, it is the reply of the divine teacher. By doing works otherwise than for sacrifice. So any work done other than as an offering to the divine, other than any work done which is not made sacred, is a work you are in bondage. You become you are bound by that work. That is the work that binds you to the ego. That is the work that is done without the grace of the divine. So this is very important to see the opposite to what happens when you do work without offering. Okay? So by doing all works with sacrifice as the object is the reply of the divine teacher. By doing works otherwise than for sacrifice, this world of men is in bondage to works. For sacrifice, practice works. For sacrifice, to make sacred, practice works. Practice works, not just outer action, inner subjective action to the mind, the emotions, and outer action. So by doing works other than for sacrifice, this world of men is in bondage to works. For sacrifice, practice works, O son of Kunti, becoming free from all attachment. So what happens when you make something sacred? What immediately happens? When you offer something and say, let thy will be done and not mine, what happens to your consciousness? There is a freedom. There is a lack of attachment and anxiety and clinging. And you feel as though, yes, that you become detached. You know that you've offered to the highest and the best will happen. So that state of consciousness, which is the state of equanimity or peace or equality, then begins to become your natural state. And it takes time, a lot of time. So, becoming free from all attachment, it is evident that all works, and not merely sacrifice and social duties, all works can be done in this spirit. Any action may be done either for the ego sense, narrow or enlarged, ego sense narrow, enlarged, national, world, so that's the larger ego sense, the family, or self, personal. So any works can be done either for the ego sense, narrow or enlarged, or for the sake of the divine. So this is the thing, to do works for the sake of the divine. All being and all action of Prakriti exist only for the sake of the divine. So this is what we have to go towards. All being and all action of Prakriti, of nature, exist only for the sake of the divine. From that it proceeds, by that it endures, to that it is directed. But so long as we are dominated by the ego sense, me, I am the worker, I am doing it, it's my work, I am gaining, it's my desire. So, but as long as we are dominated by the ego sense, we cannot perceive or act in the spirit of this truth, but act for the satisfaction of the ego and in the spirit of the ego. Very important. But so long as we're dominated by the ego sense, we cannot perceive or act in the spirit of this truth, but act for the satisfaction of the ego and in the spirit of the ego. Otherwise than for sacrifice. Egoism is the knot of the bondage. What is the knot of the bondage? Egoism. Egoism. By acting Godwards without any thought of ego, we loosen this knot and finally arrive at freedom. Very, very important words. Let us meditate on this, reflect on this for a moment. Egoism is the knot of the bondage. By acting Godwards. What does it mean by acting Godwards? Offering our works to the divine, asking the divine to come into our life, into our works, into our day, into our actions, into our thoughts, into our mind, of making sacred our life, our actions. That is what it means by acting Godwards, without any thought of ego, the smallness of mind, the reactions of the ego. It's the ego that reacts all the time. If we are free from the ego, there would be no reaction of that kind. We loosen this knot and finally arrive at freedom. At first, however, the Gita takes up the Vedic statement of the idea of sacrifice and phrases the law of sacrifice in its current terms. This it does with a definite object. So, okay. I think this is the kernel of this chapter, which you just read, this paragraph. It needs to be meditated on to go on very deeply. And then, of course, here again, Sri Aurobindo goes back to the graduality, the way that the Gita proceeds gradually, the law of graduality. At first, however, the Gita takes up the Vedic statement of the idea of sacrifice, the Vedic statement, and phrases the law of sacrifice in its current terms. This it does with a definite object. We have seen that the quarrel between renunciation and works has two forms. The opposition of Sankhya and Yoga, which is already in principle reconciled, and the opposition of Vedism and Vedantism, which the teacher has yet to reconcile. The first is a larger statement of the opposition in which the idea of works is general and wide. The Sankhya starts from the notion of the divine status as that of the immutable and inactive Purusha, which each soul is in reality, and makes an opposition between inactivity of Purusha and the activity of Prakriti. So its logical culmination is cessation of all works. The Sankhya starts with the divine notion of the divine status of the immutable and inactive Purusha and the in opposition to Prakriti, activity of Prakriti, and logical culmination is cessation of all works. Yoga starts from the notion of the divine as Ishvara, Lord of the operations of Prakriti, and therefore superior to them. And its logical culmination is not cessation of works, but the soul's superiority to them and freedom even through doing all works. In the opposition of Vedism and Vedantism, works, karma, are restricted to Vedic works and sometimes even to Vedic sacrifice and ritualized works, all else being excluded as not useful to salvation. Vedism of the Mimamsakas insist, Mimamsakas insisted on them as the means. Vedantism, taking its stand on the Upanishads, looked on them as only a preliminary belonging to the state of ignorance, and in the end to be overpassed and rejected, an obstacle to the seeker of liberation. Vedism worshipped devas, the gods, with sacrifice and held them to be powers who assist our salvation. Vedantism was inclined to regard them as powers of the mind, of the mental and material world, opposed to our salvation. Men, says the Upanishads, are the cattle of the gods, who do not desire man to know and be free. It saw the divine as the immutable Brahman who has to be attained not by works of sacrifice and worship, but by knowledge. Works only leads to material results and to an inferior paradise. Therefore, they have to be renounced. So this is, of course, we go back to the philosophical side of the Gita here. Sri Aurobindo explains again, repeats himself. It's been said in many chapters before. The difference between Sankhya and Yoga, the difference between Vedism and Vedantism, and so on. Okay. The Gita resolves this opposition by insisting. Now, what does the Gita do? That's more important. The Gita resolves this opposition by insisting that the devas are only forms of the one deva, the Ishvara. All devas are the forms of the one deva, the Ishvara, the Lord of all yoga and worship and sacrifice and austerity. And if it is true that sacrifice offered to the devas leads only to material results and to paradise, it is also true that sacrifice offered to the Ishvara leads beyond them to the great liberation. For the Lord and the immutable Brahman are not two different things. This is what the Gita says. The Lord and the immutable Brahman are not two different things. Through the Deva, one can reach the Ishvara. All the Devas, this is what the Gita resolves the opposition between the Devas between Vedism and Vedantism. Leads only to materials and to paradise. It is also true the sacrifice offered to the Ishvara leads beyond them to the great liberation. For the Lord and the immutable Brahman are not two different things, but one and the same being, and whoever strives towards either is striving towards that one divine existence. All works in their totality find their culmination and completeness in the knowledge of the divine. Sarvam karma khilam partha jnana parisampita samapyate. They are not an obstacle, but the way to the supreme knowledge. Thus, the opposition too is reconciled with the help of a larger elucidation of the meaning of sacrifice. In fact, its conflict is only a restricted form of the larger opposition between yoga and Sankhya. Vedism is a specialized and narrow form of yoga. The principle of the Vedantists is identical with that of the Sankhyas. For to both, the movement of salvation is the recoil of the intelligence, the buddhi, from the differentiating powers of nature, from ego, mind, senses, from the subjective and the objective, and its return to the undifferentiated and the immutable. It is with this object of reconciliation in his mind that the teacher first approaches his statement of the doctrine of sacrifice. But throughout, even from the very beginning, he keeps his eye not on the restricted Vedic sense of sacrifice and works, but on their larger and universal application, that widening of narrow and formal notions to admit the great general truths they unduly restrict, which is always the method of the Gita. So you can read this for yourself again later. We can take it up next time. Any thoughts, questions, or ideas? Yes?
Yes, I like your description of how to offer the things we do during the day and how to remind ourselves progressively through the day. And in the beginning, when we first start that, it might be very sporadic, but with practice, it becomes more continuous and more fluid. It becomes a habit in our nature to do that. And I think that's the crux of the matter. It's a very good way of synthesizing what this is all about.
Yes, it's very important that we dwell on that, because that is really the core of the teaching and the core of the practice.
Yeah.
Sorry? Yeah. One forgets. Yes. And the importance of, why we have to do it is really very clearly explained here in this chapter. Why do we need to do this? Because we have to get out of the ego, our personal ego and our larger, you felt it, yes. Those who have done it, feel it and know it. Don't you find when you forget to do it, the day is different, and when you do it, the day changes? I think a lot of us have had that experience. Are there any other practices that you think we can that can help in this? Yes. So also the aspect of surrender is what Ritika is saying, that after remembering and offering, also let thy will be done and not mine. This willing to surrender one's own ideas, one's own preferences, one's own way of doing things, or the result, or even what the expectation of results could be. We want something to go a particular way, but it doesn't. Mm. Yes. Yes. So the three, the book, the mother starts with the three: aspiration, rejection, surrender. These are very important. This is actually what the Gita is teaching. But Sri Aurobindo, yes, go ahead. Who's
Amita,
speaking?
also the practice of stepping back and practicing the witness attitude is
Yes.
enormously helpful in not
Mm.
acting.
Yes. What do you mean by stepping back? Somebody's asking.
You know, it's beautifully described in, I think, Living Within, the compilation by A.S. Dalal. It's in Mother's own words. I'll post it on the chat. There's a whole page on stepping back,
How to step back.
which is basically, the old adage of counting to 10 before reacting to any situation. So you just, in that practice of stepping back, immediately it allows you to remember and offer. It allows you to observe rather than participate. And it gives you the space to be quiet and calm and not immediately react to a situation.
So you step back from Prakriti to the Purusha. Step back into your soul, to step back upwards above the mind, or inwards behind the heart. But there is a passage which she'll post it.
I'll find it and post it.
Good. Okay.